We are so blessed this evening to have a friend back in our community to speak. I realized, Reverend Wood, that this was something we used to do pretty regularly before COVID-19 happened, probably on an annual basis for a number of years. One of our clergy here from the synagogue would be able to come and speak at Glencoe Union Church, and you would be generous with your time and come and offer your wisdom, your teachings, your sermons here for us. And it was one of the great losses of the many during really the last nearly 3 years that so much of that sharing, that community, that collaborative spirit between North Shore Congregation Israel and Glencoe Union Church, no less the entire interfaith body of Glencoe, no less the entire interfaith body of the North Shore, was really limited in what was possible. And so it is so sweet to be able to have an old friend back. I should say that this old friend is celebrating his bar mitzvah at Glencoe Union Church, having celebrated his 13th year there this past July. And at the very same time, Reverend Wood and his wife Jennifer are also celebrating the anticipation of their retirement in just about 2 months from now, which will be a great loss for us here in the North Shore, but a great win for the Wood family, and really for all people, because Reverend Wood and Jennifer deserve a nice rest in Maine, which is where they're headed. And we get the unique privilege of, well, for sure will be the last synagogue you preach at in 2022. I'm not sure what you've got on the docket for January or February of 2023, and there are a limited number of synagogues in Maine in general. So we feel lucky that we're in the build-up along the journey and here getting to be with you at this precious place. And so in that spirit, I just want to help everyone to recognize that I'm going to call him David. He's Reverend Wood, but to me, he's David, that David is a friend here to speak, and this would have happened anyway. But it happens at, I think, a really important time for us in the Jewish community, and I'd just like to offer a little bit of framing about that for a moment. We find ourselves most unfortunately at a time when anti-Semitism has reared its head in a way that I've shared with you, I certainly would have never expected to have to face or talk about or spend energy on in my rabbinate in my lifetime, and now as the Jewish community, and I hope as anyone who is concerned about the Jewish community knows, this is top of mind for us. Some of the patterns that Jewish communities take traditionally when responding to anti-Semitism can offer us insight on how we might move forward in this era in which we find ourselves as well. One of the most common reactions when anyone feels threatened is to hunker down, build up tall walls, not let anyone in who isn't already a part of us. It is a natural protective feature. But I would suggest and invite us to fight against that instinct. Not only do we as Jews have something very important, I believe, to offer not only our own community, but the world at large, we benefit, and so do others, from maintaining collaborative conversations, sharing identities and experiences, and investing, if not doubling down, in what interfaith relationships, collaboration in community can, should, and I'm going to use a word I rarely use, which is must be. Selfishly, for us, if we are interested in having allies, they have to know who we are. If our walls are so tall that no one can get in, how can we expect anyone to be there for us? Beyond our own self-interests, if we are invested in the holy work of repairing our world, of building bridges, of sacred connection across lines of diversity, then that has to happen in a faith setting. And all of us are invited to be participants in that, not just in our own individual lives, but in our communal lives as well. So no pressure, Reverend Wood. But we are here to listen to your sharing. We are here in friendship, as you are with us always. And I would just, again, extend an invitation to everyone to see this as an invitation into the larger community that we're all a part of. Our neighbors, literally our neighbors, the churches, the other religious institutions that surround us, not just in Glencoe, but in all of these surrounding suburbs, the friendships that we can choose to maintain, the conversations that we can challenge ourselves and others to have in the spirit of sharing, in the spirit of mutual understanding, in the spirit of what it means to be communities of faith. We pray aligned in shared high aspirations for the best of what our traditions mutually and particularly invite each and all of us into. So with no further ado, it's my pleasure to invite forward Reverend David Wood. David, I hope that your microphone will work. There is the chance it won't, in which case I will hand you this one. Let's see. It's on green. Yep, what is it? Do you think it's working?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Oh, it's working.
It's working. All right. Thank you, Wendy. Rabbi Wendy. Well, let me say that whenever Wendy comes to Glencoe Union Church, it is always one of our high occasions. And I have to say, I think I've said this to you before when I've been here, that of all my experiences here in Glencoe, being with you all on these various occasions has been certainly one of the highest moments for me. And I will remember these times with you for the rest of my life. Because in my 40 years of ministry, it is only here in Glencoe that I've had the opportunity to share with a Jewish community. And so that has been a privilege of mine. And I'm so grateful to Wendy that she invited me here one more time, entrusted me one more time to come and speak with you. And I want to make it clear that I come here tonight not just myself or my wife Jennifer, but as a representative of my congregation, who I know would want you to be greeted on their behalf. I would be so bold as to say to you that I'd like you to see me as in some way a representative of the best of the Christian community that is not out there in any way against you, but with you in this time especially. And I know that's a bold thing to say, but I want you to know that you have countless allies in my community, not just Glencoe, but in my larger community. You just have to trust me on that one. So I understand your Torah portion this week had to do with the stories of Jacob and Esau. And I know you've all been studying those carefully all week long, anticipating this Shabbat service. And so I would like to speak from that narrative in a very focused way. And so you'll need to bear with me because I won't get to that until a little bit into my homily. But what I want to talk about tonight, in using that story as my context, is the significance of our faces. You are all now facing me, and I'm very conscious of that. I can see all of your faces, and being faced with so many faces at once is what makes speaking before a crowd so unnerving. You have all these eyes on you, on me particularly. Now, you don't feel it because even though I'm looking at you, I'm not looking at one of you all the time. And so I'm sure, you don't have a sense that I'm speaking to you in particular, and so you have a sense that you're safe. You can hide. You're not exposed like I am exposed here. But if I was to have each of you turn towards the person who is next to you and say, I want you to look into each other's faces without blinking, without turning away for 30 seconds or 15 seconds. How would you feel about that? That would be intimidating, wouldn't it? I mean, I can already feel the heartbeat in the place has arisen because you're afraid that I'm actually going to ask you to do that. But my point is, there is something, isn't there, about being face to face that is unparalleled in terms of how we feel and experience one another. The intimacy we feel when we face one another, literally, is uniquely commanding and demanding. It's not the same as when you're sitting like you are now, side by side, or front or back of each other. At least, I should say, there's something about facing one another that is revealing. You might even say it's revelatory. I mean, that's what Immanuel Levinas, the Jewish philosopher, thought. He said, in every face, I'm somewhat paraphrasing him, but in every face, there is a trace of transcendence, of infinity, as he put it. He believed that it is only through our actual encounters with the faces of others that we actually form our identities. The self, he says, doesn't exist somewhere inside of us. It only comes about because of our encounter with the face of another. The formation of the self, of our individuality, has much more to do than we realize with how we encounter each other's faces. Researchers have discovered that babies between 4 and 6 months old recognize human faces at the same level as grown adults. And those of you who have raised little ones know how true that is. And they do this in a way they do not recognize other objects in their world. So our faces are commanding and they're demanding. And when you encounter another's face, it establishes a sense of obligation to that person. And they say that it is in looking at each other, in seeing one another and being seen, that we create the conditions for empathy. The inability to look someone in the face is the inability to experience our shared humanity. And you think about it, when we talk about violence being dealt with to somebody, it is as if they've been defaced as a human being. To be embarrassed, to be ashamed, or to be humiliated, how do we speak of that? We say it represents a loss of face. I imagine we have a few dog owners here. True? You don't have to show yourselves, although I'm sure you want to. But my friend has written a book, a theologian actually, wrote a book on dogs. He loves dogs. And in the course of that book, he told me, he said, I read this and he talked to me about it, is that one of the amazing things about dogs, and the reason they have become our best friend, is because they look us in the face. You notice that? That's what I don't want to minimize cat owners, okay? But dogs are something. They just look you in the face and they hold your gaze. No other animal does that, they said. Dogs are unique. My favorite Jewish theologian, Abraham Heschel, said this: a face is a message. A face speaks, often in ways beyond our control. He says, is not the human face a living mixture of mystery and meaning? We are all able to see it, but we are unable to describe it. It is not a strange marvel that among so many hundreds, is it not a strange marvel that among so many hundreds and millions of faces, there are no two faces exactly alike? It is, he says, the most exposed part of the body, the best known, but the least describable. And then he concludes, it is a synonym for an incarnation of uniqueness. I love that phrase. The face is the incarnation of our uniqueness. It's not hard, is it, to make a connection between this understanding of our faces and that we are all made in the image of God. It doesn't just tell us something about our humanity. It tells us something about the nature of God. I came across an op-ed in the New York Times. It was actually written back in 2015 by a Canadian novelist named Stephen Marsh. And he wrote about what he called the epidemic of facelessness. He was reflecting on the reality of our social media, which we are all immersed in, and how it's characterized by facelessness, faceless communication. And how faceless communication, he says, is coming to dominate how we communicate with one another. And there are, as we know, so many consequences to this. He said the spirit of facelessness is coming to define the 21st century. I think we are reeling from this reality. So much of our communication, when you think about it these days, is detached from face-to-face communication. You might say, well, we've always had faceless communication, like writing letters. But how often did you write letters? How often did you get a letter? It doesn't even begin to compare with how often we write emails or texts or tweet, whatever it might be. No society other than our own today has been so formed by faceless communication. Now, someone might object and say, but what about selfies? They're everywhere. The face is everywhere, more than ever before. People's faces are posted, they're like the wallpaper of the internet. But the digital presentation of a face, whether in a selfie or even a Zoom call, is very different than the encounter we have when we are actually face-to-face in another person's physical presence. So faces reveal how each one of us is a living mixture, to go back to Heschel, of mystery and meaning. And I would like to add to that it is an indication of what it means that we are made in the image of God, that our faces are as they are. And I think that it is that recognition that has the power to bind us as a human community. And this brings me to the story of Jacob and Esau from Genesis 33. As you well know this story, you probably all know it far better than I do. But these brothers, for good reason, as you well know, were estranged from one another for probably more than 20 years. But Jacob has been through some experiences, and for several reasons, he's now come to this need and this desire to be reconciled to his brother, Esau. And he has, as you well know, every reason to be afraid. That, Esau might kill him, for example. I mean, and Esau would have, I don't know, I guess we could say he might have some justification for that, given how their history. But so Jacob prepared very carefully for this encounter. In every way he could, he gathered his family. He even gathered gifts that he would bring to Esau. And he prepared for this reunion very carefully. And it must have been, as we read the text from Genesis 33, it must have been a rather fearful sight to see Esau approaching him with The text says some 400 men by his side. I can't imagine what that must have appeared to mean to Esau. But even having seen this, he does his best to organize his family. And then he puts himself between the approaching Esau and his family. And as Esau approaches, he bows himself to the ground. That is, Jacob bows himself to the ground 7 times as Esau becomes nearer and nearer to him. And then Esau, upon seeing Jacob, he runs to meet him. Again, the fear in Jacob as Esau is running towards him. Who knows what the 400 men were doing, but as he's running towards him, and then when he gets to Jacob, he embraces him. He probably has to pick him up from the ground, embraces him, falls on his neck, and kisses him, and they wept. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful scenes, I think, of the entire Hebrew Scriptures. It's one of the greatest moments and dramas of forgiveness and reconciliation. One of those times where, as we know from our own lives, when you experience real forgiveness, words just don't need to be spoken. The actions themselves say everything. And then the scene reaches its apex when Jacob says to his brother, "To see your face is like seeing the face of God." I think that is, again, one of the most beautiful phrases in all of Scripture. To see your face is like seeing the face of God. Because what he saw in Esau was the face of mercy, the face of the human being. When we see mercy in the face of a human being, when we experience that, I think it's about as close as we get to seeing God in this life. I don't think it's accidental that our communities are centered by face-to-face gatherings. Of course, we learned that from you. That's where it came from. We didn't come up with it ourselves. We took synagogue worship, patterned our life on that. Jesus himself spoke powerfully about the presence of God in the face of the stranger. Especially, he said, the one who was hungry and sick and without shelter or clothing or imprisoned. He called upon us to see him in those faces, which for our understanding is the same thing as saying to see the face of God there. He instructed us, as he was taught as a good Jewish boy, to love God with all our hearts, souls and minds and strength, and our neighbors as ourselves. The story of the reconciliation of Jacob and Esau is a beautiful reminder that there is no true knowledge of God separate from our relationships with one another. In other words, I will not see the face of God if I do not see it in my brother or my sister or the stranger, in the face of my neighbor. As Wendy has said tonight, we live in challenging times. And in the midst of these times, I like to think that our communities are joined in our resistance to faceless communication. We will not let our lives be intimidated, ordered by faceless communication. This year, at this time of year, as you may know, our seasons are converging. It happens every so often, right? Hanukkah, Christmas are almost exactly on the same calendar this year. And at the center, as I understand it, of your season is the celebration of the light that will not be extinguished. Do I have that right? That burns bright against that darkness that threatens to overcome it. We, in our congregation and in congregations all across this country and the world, we will be lighting our candles against the darkness as well. And on the very night when your candles will burn the brightest, that will be the same night that our congregations will be gathered and passing the light to one another. And I will do that this year, fully conscious of you. Together we know that there is only one light that can stand and will stand over against every darkness, and that is the light that comes from God. Together, in the knowledge that we are a people, you and we together are a people in waiting, with expectation. Together, we share hope for God's redemption and healing of the world. We are with you in that hope. You are with us in that hope. And in the meantime, we know we are all called to be the face of God for one another. So, may the light that shines so boldly in this season be the light by which we come to see one another's faces anew. It is that light that I see here tonight in each one of your faces. And that brings me great joy. Shabbat Shalom.
Reverend Wood, we have in Jewish tradition an expression, Ken yehi ratzon, that means, may this be God's will. Ken yehi ratzon to your words. Indeed, may your words be God's will, and more than that, may each of us help make that come to be. And we don't have to give it up from ourselves. We are actual partners with each other and with God in that shared holy work. Thank you so much. Yasher koach, as we would say.